Forest Stewardship Educator John Hooven speaking about the trouble with oaks. John started, I believe, in January, so he's about 6 months in, 5-6 months into his position. He's been hitting the ground running and doing a lot of great work on forest stewardship education here in Maryland. And I'll share a little bit about John, and he's also going to share a little bit himself, but he spent 21 years working as a commercial facilities manager before going back to school full-time to get a degree in forest ecosystem science. Tracks a little bit of my own career. I had 2 careers myself, John. I used to work in public relations for about 5-10 years with the Justice Department and corporate PR before I got back into wildlife management. So we have that in common. He volunteered as a New Jersey Woodland Stewards program in 2015, and it changed his life. And since then, he got involved with the New Jersey Forestry Association, served on the board of directors, and facilitated the very program that put him on this path. He graduated from SUNY College of Environmental Science in December 2021. And in addition to his professional work, he hikes and takes landscape and nature photos. He's a published photographer. I'm going to have to hit you up for some photos on our website, John. We are redeveloping our website for wildlife right now. And he's a writer of both fiction and nonfiction. I did not know that, John. I'm looking forward to learning more. And he hopes to find a publisher for a novel he's been working on, with more to be written in the queue. He takes a simplistic, no-nonsense approach to life. One of his key skills is professional networking and developing professional relationships. So thank you, John, for joining us. I'll briefly give us a note also for next month. If you are interested in waterfowl and waterfowl management, we have Chase Cole-Morgan with Ducks Unlimited coming in to speak about shallow water wetlands and how to manage them for waterfowl. We've recently expanded our Woodland Wildlife Wednesday to just be Wildlife Wednesday, so we can hit all sorts of wildlife now, including waterfowl and wetland habitats. And Chase is a great speaker for several events I've been at in the future. You can register for that. We've changed the URL for registration just a little bit. It's go.umd.edu/wildlife23 for 2023. So please do register for that. That should be another interesting diversity of talks as we learn more about wildlife management in Maryland. So also for the future, disregard that that wildlife W. It's wildlife23 for registration. Please do join our YouTube channel, as where all these get posted at MD Wildlife Management. If you can like it and subscribe, that helps us to bring more content to other people in the public. So if you like these presentations, that's a great place to help us and help others get this message as well. So thank you all for joining. My name is Luke McCauley. I'm the Wildlife Management Specialist for University of Maryland. And I work with a lot of forestry folks, grassland improvement efforts, deer management, human dimensions of wildlife surveys, and other things as well. So feel free, if you have any questions, to email me directly or call me, and happy to help with any of your wildlife management needs. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share and let John start his presentation this week. And we have a great audience here. John, you've drawn a lot of people. People care about oaks, so it's really cool to see this level of engagement. Thank you all for joining. Go ahead, John, if you want to share your screen and take it away.
Thank you, Luke. I appreciate that. And I think maybe they caught my name, and I've seen some of the stuff I have on YouTube as well on other forestry presentations. I'm just kidding, of course. Thanks everybody for joining me. This is John Hooven, and I'm the Forest Stewardship Educator and Master Logger Coordinator for the University of Maryland Extension. I handle the entire state. If anybody's got any forestry questions, you can send them my way. I think there's I did not include my my email, unfortunately, but it's jhooven@umd.edu for anybody that knows, and we'll get that up in the chat so that way you have it available. My background, basically, I graduated in December 2021 from SUNY ESF up in upstate New York, and started down at the in Maryland as with the Maryland Forest Service as a forester for the Somerset, and as a project forester and county forester down there. And then I jumped over here to University of Maryland back in February, and I've been creating all kinds of havoc ever since. And I hope I can help you out with any questions that you have with regards to the forest. So without any further delay, we'll get started. So basically, you all probably know oaks. Oaks happen to be the richest species of tree genus in North America. The amount of species diversity actually increases as you head southward to Mexico. The oaks are in the order Fagaceae, and fossil records indicate that the oaks genus has been around for better than 55 million years. So it goes back pretty long ways. The oldest record was found in Austria. Here in North America, we have fossil records dating back to 44 million years in North America. The types are grouped by physical characteristics that are genetically related to each other. We have three different distinct groupings of oaks. Those are the red oaks, the white oaks. And although it's not a distinct group, I threw the live oaks in as a separate group, and I'll explain that in a second. So the red oaks are characterized, they're in this section, Lobati, and I ain't even going to try to pronounce that other one, Erythrobalanus. I'm really good at that kind of stuff, by the way. But red oaks typically are leaves with bristle tips and spined tip points. The leaf veins project beyond the tip, and the leaves can be lobed, toothed, or entire. Entire, of course, meaning that it's a completely smooth edge. However, there's still a bristle tip at the end. That's one of the most distinct features of the red oaks. The acorns can take 2 years to mature. So trees that you see out in your woods today won't actually produce acorns until 2025. These particular type of oaks are high in tannins. So the acorns that they produce, if you were to eat them, would be rather bitter in taste. As a matter of fact, see, it's a bitter acorn, and that's how you know the red oak. So they typically will germinate in the spring. They're acorns. They have an open grain type of wood that is pinkish to reddish in tint. Now, the live oaks that we were talking about before are actually in the group of red oaks, but the distinctive difference between the live oaks and the red oaks is that the live oaks actually are an evergreen type of oak further south from here, that they actually will hold their leaves through the winter, while the red oaks and the white oaks will actually lose their leaves during the winter time. So that's what I think is one of the distinctive features that I think allows them to be a little bit different than the white oak and the red oak group. Now, that aside, they still have the bristle tips at the end of the oaks, at the end of the leaves. White oaks, on the other hand, and this is a picture of Quercus alba. The white oaks actually have the rounded leaves at the ends, and their buds are also rounded. That was one thing to point out about the red oaks, is that their buds are actually pointed at the end. It's a good distinguishing thing to know if you're trying to identify what type of oak you have during the winter time. The acorns only take 1 year to mature, with regard to the white oaks. The acorns are actually sweeter. And the bark can be gray, and it can also be flaky. Now, the exception to that, of course, is the chestnut oaks, which have deep furrows. Now, I'm singling out chestnut oaks. There may be other oaks that also have this distinguishing feature in the white oak family. But I'm just using the chestnut oak as a particular example. The most interesting thing with regard to the white oaks is their close-grained characteristic in the wood. It's a plastic-like coating in the cells, and it makes them superb for making barrels. The biggest difference between the red oaks and the white oaks is actually the grain. The red oaks is actually porous, and you could actually draw air right through a piece of red oak grain, a piece of red oak wood, as opposed to the white oak, which is a closed grain. Of course, the Y oak, which is famous here in Maryland, and actually Y Oak Park is right around the corner from us. It was a white oak that lived for about 700 years on the Eastern Shore and was the largest oak in the U.S. Unfortunately, it came down in a storm, but I understand that its protege are living all across Maryland. The acorns were collected and dispersed. There is another section of oaks known as cirrus, but they're not native. It's the sawtooth oak, and it belongs to, it's a potentially invasive species, but it's very popular for wildlife. And we'll see that in a future slide. Here it is right here. That's the sawtooth oak right here. But again, that's Quercus acutissima, and it is actually a very popular oak grown here and naturalized here in Maryland. That's very good for wildlife. So that's one of the reasons why it's been incorporated within the state. So we have 21 native species of oak throughout the state and one naturalized species. Of particular interest are, the white oaks. We have post oak, the bare oak, bur oak, overcup oak, swamp white oak, chestnut oak, etc. And then coming back over here, you have the red oaks, including northern red oak, pin oak, and on down. Willow oak is actually a red oak. So if you ever take a look at a willow oak, it looks like a willow leaf, but it does have a tip at the end that indicates that it is in the red oak family. So all the good things about oaks, you would think the mighty oak is the king of trees, but let's not lose sight of the fact that trees are mortal. And being the king of oaks is not exactly, the king of trees is not exactly an easy thing for oaks. We discuss a little bit about oak ecology. The interesting thing here to note with regard to oaks is only 1 in 10,000 acorns actually becomes a tree. That's a huge amount of loss when you consider all the acorns that drop, that only one of those acorns out of 10,000 actually becomes a tree. Sprouts and saplings are subject to predation by deer and fungi. The mature trees become habitat for many species, but are also important to pathogenic fungi, which is all part of the circle of life in the forest. Dead trees are excellent habitat for wildlife, including amphibians, snakes, birds, and saprophytic fungi, which is basically the fungi that promotes decay in the forest. So each stage of the oak's biology is ecologically important to wildlife. Even rotting logs on the forest floor become habitat with a food source for wildlife. Different insect larvae and isopods will actually live in and around rotting logs on the ground and can be an important source of protein to some forest mammals. Here we have little oak saplings, some white oak saplings in the forest. I borrowed this slide from Open University, which is actually based in Britain. But there's oaks in Britain, and they're very similar to our oaks here in the US. So I figured it would be a relevant slide to put in here. But this gives you a great ecological example of the species dependency on oak trees. We'll go into this with a little bit more detail in a minute. But I think the most important thing is, if you notice, everything starts with the oak, which is photosynthetic plant, and produces its own sugars and the like from sunlight and carbon dioxide and water. And based on that, all of these species trace out and have a root, if you will, pardon the pun, back to the oak tree. So, like, for example, you have the jays will eat the acorns, and basically sparrowhawks will eat the jays. And let's see here, the fox will eat the sparrowhawk, and you get a good idea of how important the oak can actually be. If you had no oaks, then you would have the jays not eating the acorns. You can see it would be a total collapse to the ecosystem, especially considering the number of oaks that we have with regard to the number of trees in North America, which is important to note, because that's one of the problems with oaks, is that they are so popular. It's important for us to support them because of this diversity and importance in the forest. This is one of the most interesting facts that I came across. This was originally presented to me by a gentleman who was the former president of the New Jersey Native Plant Society, John Black, who has since passed away. But John had brought to my attention that oaks support over 700 species of moth and butterflies. It's a big and important thing when you consider that across the board, we have a 40% decline in the number of pollinators in the natural environment. That's pretty significant. As a matter of fact, a lot of scientists are supporting the idea that we're actually in the sixth mass extinction right now. If that's a possibility, then it could very well be. All indications are based upon those facts. Now, again, going back to with regard to the species that oaks support. Pollinators are important. It's important for them to have flowers to pollinate. However, they have to have a food source when they're larvae, and that's why the oaks are important. When most people think about pollinators, they immediately think about the wildflowers, but they don't give consideration to where they start. While pollinators are important to pollinating plants, the pollinators have needs as larvae and feed on other plants in the early stages, such as oaks and other trees. Oaks support more pollinators in North America than any other tree species. In fact, the next closest is the black cherry in the prunus genre, willows and salix, and birches and betula, but each of them only support about 400 different species. When you understand this niche partitioning, species become dependent on specific species and are not necessarily generalist. They basically co-evolve with the species, and part of the issues is that if you didn't have the oaks, then you actually lose specific species of moths and butterflies as well as fungi, and right on down the chain. Now, just to give you a comparison, wildflowers in comparison do not support as many species as the oaks themselves. As a matter of fact, it's the goldenrods, that the Solidago, that actually support about 115 different species. So you can see that's a dramatic difference between the oaks and the trees and herbaceous species that they support. The next, of course, would be the asters at 112. And it basically goes on down from there. So basically, if you want to support pollinators, the thing to do is you should be planting oaks in your nearby forest areas for the sake of the pollinators. But there's other things that also are dependent upon the oak trees, and these are oak galls as an example. And oak galls are actually, if you can see my pointer, I'm not sure if you can or not, but this is actually an oak gall. They look like acorns on this tree right here, and this is on a white oak. What these actually do, the galls are created by an insect, and they actually cause a swelling in the leaves. And what happens is their larvae live inside there, and they will basically feed off of the leaf itself. There's really very little effect to the tree itself unless they were in very large numbers, but they typically don't, because oaks actually have defense mechanisms against them. And also the galls themselves will be predated upon by different types of insects. Another example is this Calliaritis species down here. This is also known as a woolly oak, a woolly sour oak gall. As you can tell by this woolly appearance with the strawberry markings on it. And once again, there's actually a gall wasp that's living inside of there, and will eventually get to an adult size and then leave the gall and live its life cycle all over again in another tree. So the food provided by the galls is what they live on. And again, that's something that the insect itself actually forces the plant to create. It's actually quite a fascinating way of doing it. Now, the interesting thing, once again, these are all species dependent. There's over 700 different species of galls that call Quercus a host. Quercus, of course, being the genus of oaks. But they're not the only things that will actually depend on the oak itself. We have fungi also, and this one here is very popular with people. It's called chicken of the woods, Latoporus sulphureus, fungi hosted by the oaks. Sometimes they cause root rot, and sometimes they cause heart rot. But there's also beneficial fungi in the form of mycorrhizae that live on the roots, and they actually will provide services to the tree. They will actually improve conduction of water and minerals, and in some cases will actually help a tree to get the nitrogen that they need by fixating on the roots. These fungi, of course, actually provide habitat for other organisms such as springtails and nematodes. They will also cause root rot to the tree and cause the tree to fall down, which actually will help with the circle of life and will help sunlight reach the floor and new trees start living all over again. Saprophytic fungi, of course, will consume the dead trees, and standing snags of trees that have died, that have not fallen over yet, they become not only food for the fungi, but also habitat for other organisms as well. And of course, the fungi themselves, as I said before, becomes a habitat for things such as springtails and nematodes and other small microorganisms. So continuing on looking at the oak ecology and wildlife that it supports, we have the acorn weevil here. Isn't this such a cute little bug? Can you not fall in love with this fuzzy little thing with its big long nose, you know? This thing actually will create a hole in an acorn and will lay an egg that produces a larvae that consumes the inside of the acorn. Here's a blow up picture of it right down here on the bottom. And what they do, remembering that only 1 in 10,000 acorns become a tree, the rest are victims of predation, such as this. So the Cursulo genus of the order Coleoptera, which is the beetles, the female beetles use their mouth parts at the end of the long snout, called a rostrum, to make a hole in developing acorns in the tree. An egg is laid, the grub hatches, eating the inside of the acorn, and as the acorn falls to the ground, the grub bores a hole in the acorn and descends into the soil, where it lives for the next 1 to 2 years before pupating and developing into an acorn to do it all over again. The interesting thing is that, you know, this could be a detriment to the trees. However, the beetles themselves are consumed by spiders and weevil wasps. So once again, it's all part of that circle of life that we were talking about. Another source of acorn predation, of course, we have over 100 species of vertebrate animals which eat acorns. The general preference is for white over red due to the bitterness. Jays, of course, and squirrels will actually cache acorns in the ground and forget where they put them for the sake of the tree. And what happens is you actually get them planting trees that will evolve into future trees down the road once they establish and propagate. The interesting thing with regard to that is that there's a function in the acorn, the oak genus and Quercus and other mast species as well, like hickories, where they will, knowing that the acorns are going to be predated, they will put out a massive amount of acorns at different times over several years. And the reason they do that is it's called masting. And the idea is believed that they basically put out so much mast that not all the critters can be able to eat them all. So they basically overcome the predation by putting out more mast than can be consumed. The net effect is the following year, of course, then you have more consumers that are now looking for additional acorns that are no longer there. So you basically get a peak in the amount of wildlife that is produced that is consuming the species, the acorns. And then, of course, you have predators that come in and feed on them. So it's a very vicious cycle, but it works for the acorns. The oak trees to overcome predation, and it's something that they developed through the course of all of their millions of years of evolution. So we can't leave out the human use of oak trees. We have many uses of oak trees. Of course, whiskey barrels immediately comes to mind. If you're somebody who favors whiskey, you can't have whiskey without oak barrels, specifically white oak. And an interesting side note, the Jack Daniels company actually produces, not that I'm endorsing any particular whiskeys, by the way, but the Jack Daniels company, they will make whiskey and put it in oak barrels. And when they're done with it, the barrels are broken down and shipped over to Scotland, I believe it is, to make 12-year-old Scotch. And they burn the inside of the barrels and they reassemble them, and they make Scotch whiskey out of the extra barrels. So I thought was a pretty interesting little side note. Of course, there's also furniture, joinery, flooring, paneling, decking, and veneers. Also medicinal uses for people with asthma, hemorrhoids, diarrhea, gastric ulcers, and wound healing. I guess we're going back to Native American uses. The most important hardwood species for lumber is oaks. It's exceeded only by 3 other conifer species in overall importance, and I'm sure one of those conifer species is loblolly pine. So that's pretty significant when you think about all of the lumber and materials that are used, that the oaks are #1 on the list. There's a remarkable demand for oak in an ecological perspective. And when you think about all the demands that oak trees are put through, not only by us people, but by wildlife itself, you start to see this picture being painted of the trouble with oaks. If you see over here also, there is a piece of wood right here. I'll read what it says on it, but it was this board foot of lumber, which was a red oak, was sawn from a tree growing within Garrett State Forest. Thanks to scientific management, the State Forest of Maryland produced more than 77 of these board feet every minute of every year. That's an incredible amount of red oak to be produced. You see a little ship in here. This is actually the USS Constitution. It's known as Old Ironsides, which is its nickname, which was actually made out of white oak. White oak happens to be so important to the US Navy that to this day, they still maintain a forest of mature white oaks in Indiana for repair purposes of the USS Constitution. So now we getting into the whole point of the seminar, and this is with regard to the trouble of oaks. So one of the biggest issues most recently, especially in the Delmarva area and Maryland, Pennsylvania, happens to be the Mid-Atlantic area, and actually up into the Northeast, happens to be oak decline. Of course, resource allocation is finite. So the resources that are allocated for reproduction, they can't always be allocated for things such as growth and repair. If the trees lose their leaves as a result of something like what used to be called gypsy moth, which has now been renamed spongy moth, the resources it takes to relief after a defoliation event takes away from the tree's ability to grow taller, wider, and reduces the sugars to be stored for future use. So effectively, what you have going on here is that there's several things that are happening right now with regard to oak species that are affecting and stressing the trees out, so that it's ultimately leading to their death. As the saying goes here, in the saying from the National Park Service, death by 1,000 cuts, if you can imagine, which makes prevention of oak decline difficult because the stressors can vary both over time and by location. And of course, we have invasive species. This one, of course, came in the late 1800s in Massachusetts. This is spongy moth, which was formerly known as gypsy moth. This invasive species happens to be prevalent now over just about most of the eastern half of the United States in various areas. If you can imagine, over 150 years ago or so that it's been in this country, that it's managed to make its way across the country, and in areas it still continues to devastate trees and forest. This particular picture is from New York State when I was working there as a forest health technician for New York DEC. And at the time, we had a particularly bad summer in 2021, and we could actually see entire forest of oak trees that were defoliated. Now, the good news is that they would send us out to survey areas, and what would happen is by the time we got out there, the trees were re-leafing, so it was actually pretty hard to tell where the damage was done. That's a good thing, but the bad thing is, of course, that this creates a tremendous amount of stress on the trees, and they can't put those resources into storing for the year or acorn production, etc. And here you see pictures of the egg masses for spongy moth, an example of the caterpillar and the adult moths. Another issue that has been slowly creeping into our area actually is probably a little bit more prevalent out in Western Maryland is oak wilt. Oak wilt is actually a fungus, Ceraticidium bagacerium. I love the Latin words. They always trip me up. It was first discovered in the Midwest in 1940s. The insect, the nitty-dewy beetles, is actually a vector, but it's also can be spread by animals and wind. And what winds up happening is that it causes premature leaf defoliation. The fungus basically gets in there and stops production. What also winds up happening is as the tree tries to put its defense mechanisms in place to stop the fungus from doing its thing, it basically suffocates itself or actually dries itself out, because it basically cuts off all the water supply to the tree, and unfortunately the tree winds up dying. This is something that I know some states have been treating aggressively, including New York State. What they actually do, unfortunately, the fungus can come in with the beetles, so they keep an eye out for the beetles. But once it actually gets into an area, the tree can actually, the fungus can actually spread through the roots of the tree. Because what happens is the roots wind up grafting with each other. So it actually spreads from tree to tree through the root system itself. It can be a real headache to get an upper hand on. You actually have to sever the roots and get rid of the tree where the infection started. Sudden oak death is another issue caused by Phytophoria ramorum. But that's mainly found out in California, but that's something else that's been put on the radar for us to watch out for. Climate change, of course, is another big issue. Unfortunately, trees are sessile in nature, so they can't get up and just walk away when it's too hot for them. The species affected, of course, by climate change, they usually get comfortable where they're at, and they can't evolve fast enough to keep up with the heat. So genetic variation occurs only over generations, and it may take 20 to 30 years for a tree itself to start producing acorns. So you can imagine that the generational life cycle is long, as opposed to like little tiny bugs, which can actually evolve a lot quicker. So as a result of that, the genetic exchange is long. And so it takes a long time for trees to catch up. However, climate change is actually happening faster than the trees are able to keep up. And that's an important note. And as you can see here, the carbon dioxide gets trapped like a puffy coat in the atmosphere. We've increased the amount of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere by 50% since 1750. Another issue, of course, is changes in management. As a society, we've become disconnected from nature. There's no doubt about it. The majority of people don't go out into their yards or into the woods these days. And we've adopted a passive approach to land management. We decide, a lot of us, to let nature do its thing, but it can be argued that nature has adapted to the disturbances of mankind since the dawn of natural resource extraction and farming. But we historically do not manage our natural areas the way we did 50 or even 100 years ago. Farms have gotten larger. Smaller farms would have occasionally went fallow or were abandoned, and could readily revert to old fields and succeed to forest. Our land use, however, has changed dramatically, and is the number one reason that our natural areas are being affected. As the land is developed today, it is almost always developed in ways that make it ecologically dead. Buildings are built to exceed the length of a human life, and impervious surfaces make it impossible for anything to live in the soils underneath. Stormwater runoff changes dramatically without a forest. We landscape areas for aesthetic values without generally considering the needs of wildlife. The management for landscaping takes very little consideration for the natural environment. And of course, as land use changes, number one reason for forest deforestation in the temperate environment is actually land use change. So of course, certainly the oaks and the pollinators suffer as a result. Historically, native and colonial land managers, as you can see pictured here, this is a prescribed burn at Rocky Gap State Forest. And the reason for that is to help with the regeneration of oaks. The Native Americans would use oak actively to promote good hunting grounds, berry production, and inhibit catastrophic wildfires. And they also use fire for the farming of land. Within the last century, many farms in the eastern U.S. were abandoned, and these farmlands filled in with oak forest. We suppressed the fire, and as a result, forest pathogens such as fungi and bacterial proliferated in the mature forests, and these areas have been suppressed. While this has all occurred, we also have changed wildlife management practices. Hunting is on a decline. White-tailed deer have exploded exponentially across the landscape, and deer are having a dramatic and negative impact on the forest as a whole and the regeneration of oaks. Additionally, species are not favored by the deer, don't get eaten, and they wind up proliferating. And more along the lines of that is invasive species, which in effect are competing with the oaks and can out-compete with them. We go over quickly with regard to regeneration. Of course, some of the troubles with regeneration, we have non-viable acorns that they just would never turn into a tree. If we at 1% of the acorns do get to propagate, actually get a chance to do so, then they have to face whether or not they're viable, damping off, which is actually a fungus that affects many seedlings, tree seedlings, and also seedlings and crops. Predation after propagation, wind damage, storm damage, fire, flood, environmental stressors, and of course, if the soil pH is not suitable for them, fertility of the soil, fertility, where'd that come from? Drought, heat, frost, and of course, site issues, inadequate sunlight, being too hot, dry, or too much sunlight, depth to the soil surface. Unfortunately, acorns propagate best on bare ground. Too much leaf litter can inhibit growth. Interesting fact, oak leaves do not readily break down, and it is believed that this contributes to their fire dependency. It's actually a fire-dependent species. The bark is actually a little bit thicker to protect it from low-grade fires, surface fires. Other species such as maples will actually succumb to fires of that type. Since the leaves persist in the environment, it increases the risk for ground fires that would clear the litter, allowing acorns to root. And of course, everybody knows the problem that we have with deer in the forest. As a matter of fact, deer leave behind the species that they do not wish to eat. However, they are also reducing their future food sources in this manner. If you look at the woods in the background here, you can see that the understory is basically absent. It's not there. And I know because I remember seeing all different types of heaths and huckleberries and blueberries back in these woods, and there's not a plant to be found. One 150-pound deer can eat up to 12 pounds of food per day. This is a fact that was originally given to me in a presentation I saw with former Penn State Extension professor Jim Finley, who has since passed away. But when I first heard that, I was just completely in disbelief. I just couldn't believe that they actually consume that much. 75% of the diet of a deer can be acorns in the late fall. Many landowners, of course, would like to create more favorable habitat for deer, but this can inadvertently create pressure on the natural landscape, reducing favorable species that are a victim of deer browse. So I guess my point there as a forester, I'm cognizant of the fact that landowners want deer, which is fine. It's just that we have to manage accordingly and offset some of the concerns and things that the deer do to the natural environment. We don't want to create more problems. With regard to regeneration, so I have a picture here. The upper picture, small one, is actually oaks regenerating just outside my front door of my house. The picture underneath of it are oaks that are regenerating. You may not be able to see, but they're actually coming up underneath an evergreen. And the deer, they don't want to be aggravated by that. That's the interesting thing about deer. They happen to be rather particular and fickle. So they don't want to be bothered with getting aggravated trying to get their food. So in this particular case, in an area where we have intense deer pressure, we actually have regeneration going on. So the point I'm making here is if we can control the deer, we can have natural regeneration. So it almost goes to say that part of the problem is actually deer in the landscape. The tree over here is actually about 10 foot tall, and I don't know how well you can see it, but basically all of the vegetation on the first 5 feet, which would be about the height of the deer, is completely gone. Anything that was there, the deer ate. And this particular tree grew out of a brush pile. the reason that it was able to grow and survive is because of the brush pile, and the deer couldn't get to it when it was a little seedling. So how do we deal with that? How do we actually help the oaks to regenerate? And see, I have a list here of different concepts, of course, but we really need to eliminate, excuse me a second, my lights went out. Eliminate deer pressure on the seedlings and the saplings. And this can be done through many different ways. Of course, some people may have a controversial idea of hunting. Of course, that's something that is very important to the ecosystem. Hunting happens to be one of the least expensive ways and most sporting ways to deal with the issue, and not to get into particulars on that, because I know it can be a sensitive subject to some people, but it is important. I found this through the research, and this is from Minnesota Extension, hazing and frightening. And the reason I put an asterisk there is because that's going to depend on whether or not that's legal to do in your particular jurisdiction. Because I know, coming from New Jersey, I made the suggestion before about having dogs on the property to basically chase deer out of particular areas. And in New Jersey, they consider that harassment, wildlife harassment, which is illegal. So that becomes an issue. So obviously, you got to check with any regulations and comply with any local regulations with regard to addressing that particular issue. Deer resistant plants, of course. So if you're replanting a forest area, what you can do is you can put deer resistant plants on the perimeter. So as the deer comes up and approaches it, they're like, oh, I don't like this stuff. So it'll go on its way and not realize that there's oaks planted behind it. That's just another way to fool the deer, so that way they don't eat the replacement trees. We got repellents. They happen to be an expensive way of dealing with an issue, especially in a forest setting. Habitat modification, which we basically were just talking about with regard to deer resistant plants. You can modify it so that the plants that have less appeal are on the outside of a perimeter of a forest, and the most important species are in the interior. And the deer happen to be browse lazy, so they just won't go any further. Of course, you see here in the background, we have tree tubes for deciduous trees. This was a planting near the Chesapeake Bay, part of the Healthy Wilderness, Healthy Forest initiative. This landowner actually replanted 7 acres for free and was able to do so through that program. The tubing and the maintenance on the trees are all good for 5 years. But tree tubes can be pretty effective. Unfortunately, they can also be expensive. Other types of mitigation, of course, we have fencing, brush piles. We were talking about that before. That one tree I showed you that was 10 feet tall actually grew out of a brush pile and wouldn't be there today if it wasn't for the fact that it started as a sapling in a brush pile. Slash walls and slash. Slash, of course, is the leftover stuff that the loggers can't use, that do not go to the mills, and they just leave it piled up, and sometimes it's burned. The picture in the center here is actually shows some slash, but that's actually a little bit worse than it should be. That type of thing is an area that couldn't be replanted because there's just too much slash in the way. It does, however, allow the deer not to get too close, so that way you can have regeneration of deciduous species. The lower right picture is, lower left picture is a slash wall. And that's actually from the Arnott Forest. Cornell University in southern New York. And what they actually did is, as an experiment back in 2017, Cornell started to experiment with slash walls. And what they did was they had a problem in R0 with regeneration. They were getting no regeneration in the forest whatsoever. So they had to come up with an effective way to slow down deer predation while also protecting the saplings. So they came up with an inexpensive way of actually using slash after they did a harvest to build these slash walls. And the slash walls basically are 10 feet high by 20 feet wide. They prohibit the deer from coming in, and what they do is they gate the area with conventional fencing materials where they have to, so they can gain access in and out of the site. In effect, what that's doing is it's allowing the forest to regenerate naturally, which you can see in the picture to the left, and without deer pressure. And as a result, what's happening is you have natural regeneration happening the way it should, and without any pressure to the ecosystem. What also is happening is in the course of time, the slash wall will actually degrade back down into the environment, so that way it's no longer there. But by that time, the trees will be tall enough that they won't be affected by deer browse anymore. Interesting side note, as I was doing the research for this, is that predators are actually having a ball with these slash walls. Apparently, the fox, the bear, and this is actually a fisher cat. It's just not actually a cat. But they've been basically living on species that are living inside the slash walls, and they have no problem going up and over the slash walls, where deer actually do have a problem with that. So, and that's all I have. If we have any questions.
Thank you, John. Oh, we got some already coming in. Here we go. Somebody is ready, and they're waiting for this last slide. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks, John, for a great presentation. Everybody who's listening, please feel free to type questions into the chat. I see one from Woody here. Just click that chat button and type your questions in here. If you need to go, we are coming up very close to the 1 p.m. hour, but I think, John, it's okay with you to stay on for a little bit longer to answer questions, and we will continue this on while we cover some questions. So I'll read Woody's question. He says, your thoughts. 20 years ago, the Pennsylvania folks declared war on deer as the sole cause of regeneration failures. Later, research determined acid deposition was about 50% responsible. Many believe Pennsylvania foresters have lost all credibility. How can the other stakeholders ever trust the foresters again? I'll let you take that.
But here's the deal, unfortunately, and this is something that has to be accepted by society as a whole. As most people may know, science most recently, especially since recent times, we'll say during the pandemic, post-pandemic, there's been a lot of attacking of science. Science is not exact. Science is it takes a lot of research, and it also takes a lot of time, and it evolves. So unfortunately, what we knew 50 years ago may not be relevant to what we know today. But that has a lot to do with the evolution. At the time, it was probably the best advice to go on. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast, and that's something that we have to live with. But we have to be very open-minded when it comes to research and scientific investigation. That, you know, it is the best information that we have available from the research that is done. If there's any shortcomings in it, it has more to do with the fact that not enough research is done. And it's all part of the scientific method. I would venture to say that if society thinks that there's a better way of doing it, we would be doing it. But unfortunately, that isn't necessarily the case. We do the best with the resources that we have available. So that's basically the best answer I can give to that question. I can't speak with regard to Pennsylvania foresters myself. I've not worked in Pennsylvania. I've only worked in New York and down here in Maryland, and got my education up in New York State. So I really can't say anything more specifically about Pennsylvania foresters.
Yeah, we can always just blame it on the Pennsylvania foresters. You should, I guess maybe one solution is you should just listen to Maryland foresters, maybe. That was a joke trying to lighten up the situation, but yeah, it certainly is a process of learning that is undergoing constant revision. Oh, great. Dennis Potts asked, when we are monitoring oak trees in woodland areas, what are the key components we should take into consideration when we look at the overall health of these trees? And this is something I was also thinking about. Yeah, what are the sort of big picture things that people might want to think about to improve or manage for oaks? And I saw fire was one, but I was also wondering, is there, what are some of the big picture considerations? Should people think about insecticides for certain trees to maintain them under invasive species concerns, things like that?
I will make a plug here, and I don't make any money from this. So by all means, this is an honest endorsement, but I do have a forest health presentation on YouTube. If you search by my name and look up forest health, it actually dives specifically into this particular topic. But the short answer is you just basically keep an eye on the trees and look for any. It's really good to be in touch with your woods and your environment. The only way that you're going to know anything that's happening is if you start seeing subtle differences. In my particular, I have 4 acres up in New Jersey, and one of the things that I have been looking at recently, in addition to the deer browsing that's been going on, but also I also have noticed that there's an increase in the amount of tree decline. You have defoliation happening on living trees. That's a good indicator that there's something going on with the roots. Of course, it's kind of a complicated issue. In this particular instance, I also have an issue with fungi in the forest. It could be impacting the roots. Of course, it's a matter of keeping an eye on things and making observations. In my particular instance, what I'm actually observing, I'm seeing conchs on trees, which is definitely an indicator of a fungus happening. I haven't seen anything in the way of any evidence of fungi happening in the soil that would indicate a root pathogen. But some trees have actually fallen down in windstorms. And you can see that the roots were severed. So there's definitely a fungus happening there. Now, the area I'm talking about in particular happens to be a fire-dependent ecosystem. There hasn't been a fire there in over 50 years, and it's probably due for something. As a matter of fact, I'm planning on doing some kind of prescribed fire work in the near future to see if that helps out with things a little bit. So. But yeah, I think the most important thing is keeping up on an idea of keep an eye on your forest. And if you start noticing subtle differences, start asking a question, reach out to Extension and your forestry professionals, including Maryland Forest Service if you're in Maryland or other jurisdictions. And just basically, that's what they're there for. They're there as a resource for you to check and ask questions. They want to know what's going on, and I do too.
John, I think it's so in a similar vein. I know I had a neighbor had we have another question coming up, a follow-up. If you see a sudden yellowing of oak tree leaves, what should we consider next steps for helping the tree?
That would depend on the environment it's at. If it's something that's happening in the landscape, Again, you can contact a forester or an extension person, or even somebody who's into arboriculture, such as an arborist. Always make sure that you're working with a licensed professional if that's necessary in your jurisdiction. But definitely leave it to the professionals. Don't let it get out of hand. Now, the thing about it is, you can always call somebody to come over and take a look at it, and they should be able to give you any advice for free. They'll also, with regard to arborists, they may charge you once they know what's going on. Of course, that's how they make a living, so you have to take that in consideration. But yeah, the most important thing is have a professional just give a double check. You can also take a picture and send it to the folks at Extension. The master gardeners and myself are here to help you with any kind of issues with regard to that. If it's something that we figure that you need to contact a professional for, then we will go ahead and make that recommendation.
Great. Seems like it could be what, like fungus, insects. It seems like sometimes you could have multiple causes of the symptom, like yellowing leaves, and you'd have to look in a little bit other symptoms as well.
Oh yeah, I mean, like definitely, for example, we just went. We're in a drought right now, even though it's raining outside, right where I'm at right now. But we've been in a drought, and yellowing could definitely be caused from stress from the lack of water. I mean, water, of course, is essential for photosynthesis in the leaves, and without water, then the tree will start going dormant, and that can also lead to yellowing. Yellowing also is a symptom of a lack of certain mineral nutrients. If I remember correctly, iron chlorosis can also cause yellowing of leaves as well.
Cool. I had a neighbor that, and I'm curious if you've seen this as well. We've seen several oaks. Some of my neighbors are concerned about oak declines and dying white oaks. I know one had it seemed like a minor scrape on the trunk. Some machinery brushed the trunk and damaged the bark a little bit. And it was a large, beautiful, mature oak. And the scrape on the trunk I think it was from an excavator or something, was only maybe a 6-inch sort of gash. It wasn't that deep, but it was damage on this large trunk, and the tree ended up dying. Do you recommend, is that a common way in which are fungi entering into the bark at these wound points? Is that kind of a major cause? Is that something to watch out for? Are there other things that people can do to try to manage for their oaks in those environments?
Yeah,
Those situations?
as a matter of fact, I actually wrote an article for our loggers newsletter, basically asking loggers to keep an eye on their equipment when they're working around trees that they're going to leave in place, for the very sake of all you have to do is scrape a tree, and it'll basically become a port for not only fungus, but also bacteria and viruses, and also different types of insect species as well. As a matter of fact, everybody's been concerned about spotted lanternfly making its way across the area. And spotted lanternfly is what's known as a hemiptera, which actually pierces the bark and sucks the sap out. But while that in itself may not be damaging to the tree, it's a secondary pest that actually will get in after that piercing of the bark, which will actually cause a lot of mortality. And those, of course, referring back to the fungi, the bacteria, viruses, and of course, other insects as well.
Cool. All right, we had another follow-up. Are oak trees becoming more susceptible to scale diseases?
Well, under circumstances, I think when we take a look at climate change and what's happening across the landscape and all the stresses that are impacting trees in addition to climate change, then I would say susceptibility can, of course, increase across the board on anything. And, basically you're looking at a healthy tree that now is getting weakened in the process and has many things that has to do battle against. So I could see that being a possibility. I have not heard anything in that specific with regard to scale, with regard to oaks. It's something I would have to look into a little bit further.
Well, Pat Kelly followed up and asked, is there anything you can do to seal a damaged tree?
That's a good question. That's something else that I would have to follow up with. If we could possibly get her contact information. I don't have an answer right off the top of my head. Even though I specialize in forest health issues, I'm not an arborist, and I'm not exactly qualified to give the best advice on what to do in that particular instance. But that's something I could definitely look into.
Yeah, I personally have heard, with pruning, there used to be a move to seal pruned branches, and I've heard recently actually it's not needed. There's a lot of natural defenses trees have, but I guess some of it might. Pat actually just sent her email in on the chat to me, and hopefully I'll send it on to you.
Thanks.
Is I would think possibly, I mean, if it was a specimen tree you really want to keep in your yard and you have to deal with things like this, I would think maybe I have had an arborist talk to me about spraying with fungicides, spraying with insecticides, and those types of things. I guess at least preventing, these fungus or I guess insects at least getting into those wounds as much. But I guess you have to probably be pretty careful on that. Tom, I can't pronounce. I won't try your last name. Tom says letting trees heal themselves. Don't paint or tar the wounds.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Heals. Trees are really good at healing themselves. As a matter of fact, so much so that sometimes trees will get damaged and you won't even know it until the tree comes down 30 years later, and it was hiding a wound that it may have suffered years and years ago, and was able to repair itself. And all of a sudden you have heart rot going on that you couldn't see because it was able to hide it so well.
Great. Mikkel asks, I'm interested in this also, how to seal a damaged tree. I'll pop that email over to you as well, John.
I do recall when I was a facilities manager, I used to deal with an arborist who told me, and I'm not specific to the details, but I knew he said something about taking a screwdriver and running it along the edge to actually encourage the cells to actually regenerate along the wound. Of course, I've never seen that myself, aside from him telling me, and I'm really not sure exactly how that works. So I would hesitate to give that advice professionally without any more information.
Yeah, I would think other things like reducing other stressors, such as if it's a time of drought. And this is, again, probably something you would do in an environment like a yard with specimen trees rather than in a forestry environment. But, water resources, nutrient, like perhaps like fertilization, which my understanding is fertilizing your general yard does percolate down to the roots of the tree eventually. So just a regular fertilizer for a lawn or whatever would also potentially give that tree a little bit of a boost to reduce its susceptibility maybe in a stressful year.
You got to be mindful too, though. Fertilizer can also go the other way. In particular, I remember New Jersey had a 600-year-old oak that was in a cemetery, and they came along and cleaned the headstones of the cemetery, and they killed the oak in the process. Just because they changed the pH of the soil.
Late season fertilization. I think you want to make sure if you're going to be fertilizing to do it before. With some of my plants, I say before July, because you don't want the tree to initiate a big burst of growth right as the summer is starting to wind down, and those trees should be starting to put nutrients back into the root systems in preparation for winter. So I have heard that you can damage oaks through late fertilization, and it fosters all this growth at a time when it actually should not be growing. It should be starting to wind down. Yeah.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, it was Tom McVoy's book from University of Vermont. His book on silviculture, basically, I had never realized this, but he indicated that today, as a matter of fact, June 21st, first day of summer, is the day that trees stop putting new growth out, and they start putting their reserves into the ground. So basically, net primary production with regard to the trees stops today, and that has to do with the sun. Once the sun starts getting lower in the horizon, the trees stop primary production, so that way they're putting all their resources into next year's growth. And basically, so this is the last day of growth effectively for trees based on that information.
Interesting. That applied to blueberries. I'm trying to grow blueberries, and I saw that same thing. So I think they mentioned July, but yeah, the solstice is probably a good marker for that to be safe. Great. One more question from Pat Kelly, and I think we'll probably wrap it up there unless anybody jumps in soon. Strange question dealing with graft. Could you take a smaller branch and cut it past the collar where it meets the trunk, then strip the bark on that pruned branch and graft that over the wound on the trunk?
It does sound like a possibility based upon what I know. I haven't done any grafting myself, and anything I know about it has only been from an academic perspective, but that does seem plausible. It's basically whether or not you realize it, but the fruit you get in the store with regard to like peach trees in particular are all from grafted stock. They don't basically grow them from seed. They basically take a peach tree that they know is growing good, and they'll graft it onto another rootstock and grow it from there, so they can get a guarantee. So pH, Denise, I'm sorry, Dennis, I'm so sorry about that. I read that too quickly. Dennis, the best pH range for oak, they actually like acidic soils. So it's a little bit, I would say, you're going below 7 at that point. So I don't know off the top of my head the best range, but I do know they like an acid soil.
Which is really common at least on the coastal plain parts of Maryland. I think up in the Piedmont, do we have more basic soils?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I imagine so, just based upon the former use. Listen to me. Where you have more limestone, of course, it's going to be more basic. So
right. Either way, probably a lot of oaks don't require a lot of, if they're adapted native oaks to the area, probably don't require a lot of soil amendments.
Exactly.
Right. But again, if you're trying to maximize a particular specimen tree, I would probably figure out the exact species of the tree and then do some searching around to find out the ideal requirements if you'd like to sort of boost a specimen tree in a yard or something like that. So thanks for the questions, Dennis, Pat, and others. I think we're kind of wrapping up. I don't see anything else coming in. We've gone a little bit over. Thank you, John, for going about 20 minutes over and answering all these questions. Thank you, everybody, for joining. This will be available on YouTube. Thanks for coming. Join us next week. Share with others, share with your friends, anybody who might be interested in waterfowl management for shallow wetlands. I'm looking forward to learning some more about that next month. Thank you all for coming, and have a great week and month. Take care.
Thank you.